Sanctions refer to penalties imposed on a country, its officials, or private citizens, as a form of punishment or deterrence for specific policies and actions. No doubt, sanctions have a negative impact on a country's economy and cause collateral damage to ordinary citizens. Sanctions will have a negative impact on the availability of food, medicine, and healthcare services, life expectancy and infant mortality, human rights, and political stability. Sanctions are used as a coercive measure to achieve specific policy objectives related to trade or humanitarian violations. And instead of going to war with a country, economic sanctions are used as an alternative weapon to achieve desired outcomes. Let's see how Russia's economy is doing in the face of unprecedented sanctions. According to Western media, Russia is suffering real consequences that will worsen over time, and tough sanctions imposed on Russia are squeezing Russian economy and causing shortages and scarcity. But the question is whether the mainstream media is telling the truth about Russia. And does the West's sanctions still make sense? Recently, an independent news channel in YouTube exposed the lies of Western media. The YouTube channel dispatched reporters to Russia, where they found that the country's economy had not been impacted as much as the mainstream media had claimed. According to Western media, tough Western sanctions imposed on Russia are squeezing the Russian economy and causing shortages and scarcity. Networks like CBS News, PBS NewsHour have reported that the country is facing hefty international sanctions. The New York Times reported that Western sanctions against Russia have led to shortages of essential goods and food items. While The Washington Post reported that Russia is facing Soviet-era shortage. To find out the truth, a reporter from the channel went to the grocery store in Moscow to see if the food was expensive. We know that the cost of food and other everyday necessities is higher in cities than in small towns or villages. And as the cosmopolitan capital of the country, Moscow is the perfect place to get the whole story. The reporter was surprised to see the grocery store, which is located within a shopping center, was filled with both regular consumer and stores, all stocked with food items. And, because the mainstream media, such as the New York Times and the Washington Post, would not lie about the shortage of essential goods, he went on to learn the prices of food items, as well as how expensive everything is due to inflation and sanction, and whether the items are affordable for ordinary people. To compare the prices of the various food items, he picked up some basic food items for himself, such as milk, eggs, beef, bread, and mushrooms. The cost of milk was 89 rubles or $1.41, bread for 60 rubles or 95 cents, beef for 175 rubles or $2.78. So the total cost for milk, eggs, beef, bread, and mushrooms was 499 rubles, or $7.92, which was both affordable and cheap. It appears that the mainstream media is not entirely truthful in this regard. So ordinary people in Russia continue to live as before the war. It looks like the chaos on the Russian markets has calmed down. Since its lowest point in early March, the ruble has gone up and is now close to where it was before the war. He also spoke with locals from rural markets outside of Moscow to see if the sanctions had any effect on them. People said that most prices have stayed the same, but the costs of some foods have gone up significantly. Local residents said it's not true that Russians are suffering because of sanctions, but that the uncertainty of everything has made people more serious about financial matters and financial literacy. As Russia waged war on Ukraine, the US and its allies scrambled to respond, and sanctions were chosen as the preferred weapon. However, by imposing sanctions, the West plays into the hands of Russian President Vladimir Putin. And sanctions hurt Europe more than the rest of the world, and the working class there is the one who pays the price. Russia, on the other hand, instead of being discouraged by the severe and overwhelming costs on Russia's economy, the Kremlin sees sanctions on individuals, capital, and imports as a blessing in disguise. Few months ago, a senior Russian diplomat stated that Western sanctions against Russia have a long failed history. And it's true to a certain extent. In 1979, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, President Carter imposed a grain embargo. The Soviet Union relied on food imports, and the US believed limiting its access to American grain would cause significant harm. The decision was controversial, and the CIA warned that the Soviets would switch to other suppliers, and that is what happened. And after that, President Reagan quietly scrapped the grain sanctions. In 2014, in response to Russia's annexation of Crimea and involvement in the conflict in Donbass, the US, EU, and several Western governments sanctioned Russian politicians, media personalities, military commanders, oligarchs close to Putin, and Russian state-owned companies. The Kremlin responded by banning import of most Western food into Russia. According to popular views among Russian elites, Western sanctions strengthen Russia rather than harm it. They believe that sanctions hurt the West more than Russia.